I thought betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to me, until I realized rebuilding my life meant finding strength, love, and forgiveness in places I never expected. I still remember the moment life threw its first real curveball at me, long before Amanda and I reached our 10th wedding anniversary. It was back in my early 20s, during those hectic years when I was balancing a demanding full-time job with night classes. Becoming an architect had always been my dream, but with finances stretched thin, I spent my limited free time sketching blueprints for friends who could only afford to pay me with a cup of coffee. That relentless grind felt like preparation for anything life could throw my way, or so I thought. The first real test of my character came when my younger brother was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. Our family pulled together in ways we never had before, hosting bake sales, applying for grants, and constantly battling with insurance companies just to cover his treatments. I can still picture those long nights in the hospital, sitting by his bedside, watching his small frame connected to endless IVs. It was during those moments that I made a promise to myself, to cherish every second of life, no matter what. It was during that challenging time that I met Amanda. She was radiant, sharp, quick-witted, and had this magnetic energy that drew everyone in. We connected instantly, bonding over a shared love for literature and those deep, late-night conversations in diners. Our first date went well past midnight as we debated what happiness truly meant and whether it could survive in a world full of chaos. By the third date, I was certain, Amanda was the one. Against everyone's advice, we married young. Wait until you're more stable, they all said. But stability felt like something we could only build together. We moved into a small apartment, counted every penny, and saved for the life we envisioned, a future painted in bold, vibrant colors. When our first child was born, it was an exhilarating yet overwhelming experience. We weren't entirely ready, but we took on parenthood with determination, relying on hand-me-downs, creativity, and a whole lot of grit. A couple of years later, we welcomed our second son, and life turned into a beautiful, chaotic whirlwind of sleepless nights, diapers, and the endless sound of laughter echoing through our home. But it was during those years, when life should have felt the most fulfilling, that I began noticing something unsettling in Amanda. A restlessness that hadn't been there before, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I threw myself into work and side projects, determined to secure a better future for us. Meanwhile, Amanda seemed trapped in the monotony of daily life, endless routines that, I guess, began to wear her down. I noticed the distance growing and tried to close the gap. I planned date nights, surprised her with little gifts, and made an effort to keep things fresh. But no matter what I did, it felt like we were drifting further apart. Still, I clung to the belief that love, like architecture, was about building something strong, something that could withstand wear and tear with constant care and attention. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly, a missed dinner here, a late night without explanation there. I chalked it all up to the inevitable stresses of raising two young boys and running a household. But hindsight, as they say, has a cruel way of highlighting what you failed to see in the moment. Now, those subtle signs stand out like glaring warnings I should have heeded, bright neon lights foretelling the storm ahead. As Amanda and I walked back from my youngest son's dormitory, I could see she was fighting back her emotions, barely managing to hold it together. We had just helped him settle in, and while I felt a pang of melancholy, it was clear Amanda wasn't alone in her sadness. Katie, our neighbor, stood beside her, quietly dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Her son was sharing the same dorm room as ours. It feels like they were just little kids yesterday, Katie murmured, fumbling in her purse for another tissue. Amanda gave her a soft, understanding nod and accepted a tissue to dab at her own eyes. It's surreal, she said quietly. They're stepping into lives of their own, where they'll make decisions without us hovering over them. As the two women shared their thoughts, I found myself retreating into my own mind, lost in a whirlwind of doubt. The decision I had been wrestling with for years loomed larger than ever. Was I truly ready to take that step? Was it necessary at this point, or was it already too late? We approached the parking lot in silence, and as Amanda reached out for my hand, I instinctively pulled away, pretending to search my pocket for the car keys, even though we weren't anywhere near the SUV. I noticed Katie giving me a curious glance, but Amanda, ever composed, spoke softly before anyone could comment. "It's okay, Mark. I know what you're feeling." If only you did, I thought, keeping my gaze fixed straight ahead. In reality, she had no idea what was racing through my mind. I was already spiraling back to that pivotal moment when everything changed, when the certainty in our marriage began to unravel. It was shortly after we'd celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary, a milestone that happened to coincide with a contentious election year. Back then, it felt like every politician's main goal was to outdo the other in accusations of dishonesty, painting their rivals as even bigger liars and crooks. Looking back now, that chaos mirrored the turbulence brewing in our relationship, something I couldn't quite see then but can't stop thinking about now. I remember sitting at my desk that afternoon, cynically wondering if, when those corrupt politicians eventually passed on, they'd be buried in regular graves, or just screwed into the ground like the tools they were. It was a fleeting, bitter thought, one of many that crossed my mind during those tense days. After lunch, I went to pick up the mail, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But there, nestled among the usual bills and flyers, was a padded envelope that caught my attention. I wasn't prepared for what I found inside. The envelope contained a letter, a formal, carefully worded apology from someone named Josh, someone I hadn't thought about in years. His words were measured, almost clinical, as if he had rehearsed this in his mind 1,000 times. For 90 days now, as part of the 12-step program, I've been trying to make amends to those I've hurt. I deeply regret our past actions, but I don't want to disrupt your life or cause you emotional distress. That's why I'm writing this letter instead of reaching out in person. I'm asking for your forgiveness and, if you wish, promising never to contact you again. Enclosed is something I've held on to for too long. I don't have the strength to destroy it myself, but I also can't keep it. Do with it what you will. With warm regards, Josh. My heart pounded as I set the letter down and reached into the envelope. What I pulled out next made my stomach churn, a stack of old photos. Photos that left no room for interpretation. There had been an affair. Josh and Amanda. I could barely breathe as I flipped through the images, each subsequent one more deadly than the previous one. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the framed pictures of my family, Amanda, me, and the boys, captured in moments of happiness that now felt tainted. As I studied those photos, a horrifying thought crept in, one I couldn't push away. What if the boys aren't mine? Grabbing a recent photo of Amanda and our sons, I examined it closely, searching for something, anything, that would reassure me. Both boys shared Amanda's features, but I could see my jawline in them, my build. Still, doubt gnawed at me, relentless and cruel. Desperate for answers, I tore through my desk drawers until I found what I was looking for, our old medical records. It didn't take long to find the blood types. Amanda and I were both type O. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling as I read the bold letters next to our son's name, a positive. You don't have to be a doctor, or even pass high school biology, to know that two parents with type O blood can't have a child with type A blood. My heart sank. I stared at those two words, hoping they'd change, willing them to transform into something else. But they didn't. They remained stubbornly, painfully real. A tidal wave of wild, frantic thoughts crashed over me. I'll leave Amanda. No, I'll confront her. Maybe I'll take the boys and walk away without a word. Or perhaps. My mind spiraled, each new thought more chaotic than the last. Trying to steady myself, I took a deep breath, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. I needed to confront Amanda, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. Later that evening, I found myself sitting across from her at the dinner table, my mind racing while she talked about her day. She seemed relaxed, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. Out of nowhere, I heard myself ask, "Hey, do you remember Josh?" Amanda froze for a split second, the briefest flicker of tension crossing her face before she recovered. "Josh?" she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Yeah. I haven't thought about him in years." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "You know, he was always running around with his camera, snapping pictures of everyone's kids. Kind of creepy, don't you think?" Amanda let out a small, uneasy laugh. Her tone, however, carried a hint of something else, relief. "Believe me, Mark," she said firmly, meeting my eyes, "Josh wasn't into kids." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like time stopped. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children. But the evidence was staring me in the face, and no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise, the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Still, I stayed quiet. I wasn't ready to confront her, not until I figured out what to do next. Whatever happened, my life, and the life of the family I had fought so hard to build, would never be the same again. I frowned, my voice hardening as I pressed her. "Oh. And how do you know that?" Amanda turned back toward the counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel as if my question didn't unsettle her in the slightest. Without missing a beat, she called out to our youngest, who was in the living room, breaking the tension with a cheerful tone. It felt deliberate, like she was trying to redirect the conversation before it went any further. Still, I wasn't about to let it slide so easily. "Amanda," I said, more firmly this time, "is there a reason I should be jealous?" She hesitated, stirring her coffee slowly without looking at me. "Of course not," she finally said, her voice light, but her body language tense. "Josh was just a harmless drunk with a camera. He might have made a decent photographer if he hadn't been, well, you know." Her words were casual enough, but something about her hesitation, the way she avoided my gaze, gnawed at me. I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. I wanted to believe her, God, I wanted to believe her, but the doubt lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Amanda tried to keep things light, giving my shoulder a playful tap. "Come on, Mark. Don't tell me you're suddenly jealous of Josh after all these years. That's ridiculous." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a sip of my coffee, thinking back to my upbringing. My father had always drilled into me the importance of integrity, being honest, standing firm in your beliefs, and never compromising your values. Even in my youth, when temptation arose or situations tested my character, I stayed true to those lessons. That's just how I was raised. And yet, here I was, feeling like I didn't even know if the foundation of my marriage, the life Amanda and I had built, was as solid as I thought. Jealous? "No, Amanda," I said quietly. "It's not jealousy. It's something else." She didn't respond right away. She busied herself tidying up the kitchen, her back to me, the tension palpable in the air. I wanted to push further, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I might uncover, fear of confirming the suspicion that had wormed its way into my mind since the moment that padded envelope arrived. Instead, my mind drifted to memories of my parents. They had faced hardships of their own, raising a family on a tight budget, yet they always managed to provide for us, no matter how difficult things got. I once asked my mother how she managed to keep everything together during those tough years. She had simply shrugged and said, "Cut the bread thinner, add more water to the soup." That was her way, practical, resilient, always finding a way to stretch what little we had. My father, on the other hand, was a deeply religious man, but his faith wasn't tied to rituals or formalities. To him, belief was something you lived through your actions, not just words. Every evening, after saying grace at dinner, he'd add, "Next time, may there be more at the table, not less. And Lord, please save us from your foolish followers." He had a way of finding humor in the most serious moments, always grounding us with his wisdom. I sighed, my gaze dropping to the framed family photo on the wall. That image, a picture-perfect snapshot of what I thought was a happy, whole family, now felt like it carried a secret I wasn't ready to face. The weight of uncertainty pressed on my chest, and I realized that no matter how strong I tried to be, the cracks in my life were becoming harder to ignore. Just then, Amanda turned around, breaking my train of thought. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Mark, sometimes I think you overthink things too much. Can we just leave it in the past where it belongs?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table, breaking the tension. It was Eric, an old friend who had been through his own share of betrayal years ago. I hadn't thought about him in a while, but as I picked up the phone, I couldn't help but remember his story. He had once caught his fiancée in a compromising situation with his mentor. Instead of confronting them in a fit of rage, Eric played the long game. He stayed at the firm just long enough to secure his bonuses and benefits before quietly leaving and taking key clients with him. The firm never recovered, collapsing a few years later. Eric's voice on the other end was calm, but direct. "Mark, revenge is just another way of giving them power. If they know they've hurt you, they win. The real victory is not letting them affect you at all. Trust me, ignoring emotional manipulators is the best long-term move. It might not feel satisfying right now, but it's the only way to truly move on." His words hung in the air long after the call ended. I stared at my coffee, now cold, and thought about what he had said. Was he right? Could I really ignore this gnawing doubt and move forward without confronting Amanda? Could I live with the possibility that the life I thought I knew had cracks beneath the surface I had never seen? Deep down, I knew I couldn't. But I also knew that whatever came next, I needed to be ready. Ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. I stared at Eric, my mind reeling from his warning. He leaned forward, pointing a finger at me, his tone sharp and direct. "Here's the deal, you've got a decent life, a wife, a home, 2 kids. If you push too hard, you could end up alone in a cramped apartment, broke, with your kids working part-time just to help make ends meet, while Amanda moves on with her life and her new companions, all funded by you. You're saying alimony and child support will take most of my income, even for a child that might not be mine?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "Amanda has a job, for God's sake. Why should I be on the hook for a kid who might not even be mine?" Eric shrugged, his expression grim. "Doesn't matter. The courts don't always care about biology. If you've been raising the kid and acting as their father, they'll argue it's in the best interest of the child to maintain financial support. Don't believe me? There's a case in Florida where a guy paid child support for years to a woman he was never married to. When he finally got a DNA test proving the child wasn't his, the court still ruled he had to keep paying. Why? Because the child was used to the financial stability he provided. That case is still dragging through appeals, but the kid will be 18 by the time it's resolved, and that man will never see a penny of what he's paid." I slumped back in my chair, shaking my head in disbelief. "That's insane. It's not even fair." "Fair doesn't come into it," Eric continued, his voice steady but serious. "And don't think marriage counseling is always the solution either. In maybe 10% of cases, it helps. Most of the time, it just gives the spouse more time to plan their exit strategy. Statistically, 2/3 of women who attend counseling sessions are the ones who ultimately file for divorce. And more than half of women who cheat, they end up leaving their marriages entirely." The numbers hit me like a gut punch, but Eric wasn't finished. He fixed me with a serious look. "You're 35, right?" I nodded, unsure of where he was going with this. "Well," he said, "statistically, wives are most likely to cheat around the age of 45. If Amanda's already had one affair." I didn't want to hear the rest. The implications alone made my chest tighten, but Eric's words reminded me of something else, something my father once told me when I found out I was going to be a dad. His voice echoed in my mind, calm yet firm, a lesson I had carried with me ever since. "Mark," he had said, "a lot of men become fathers, but few truly become men. To be both a man and a father, your only priority must be your children. If there's not enough food, you go hungry. If there's no shelter, you brave the cold. If money's tight, you go without. Strength isn't about bravado. Real strength means admitting when you need help, putting your pride aside, and standing firm for the sake of your family." That lesson had shaped how I saw my role as a father. I wanted to be the kind of man who put his kids first, no matter the cost. But now, sitting here, faced with the possibility that the life I had built might not be what I thought it was, I didn't know how to proceed. Did being a father still mean sacrificing everything, even if I wasn't sure the boys were mine? Or did strength mean walking away from a life built on lies? Eric leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "Look, I get it. This isn't something you can decide overnight. But trust me, if you let your emotions control you, if you act out of anger, jealousy, or revenge, you're only giving Amanda more power over you. The real victory is not letting her affect you. You stay calm, you stay in control, and you think carefully about your next move." His words lingered as I sat there, silent, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to confront Amanda right then and there, demand the truth, and put an end to the uncertainty once and for all. But another part of me knew that wasn't the smartest course of action, not yet. I needed to be sure, needed more clarity before I made any rash decisions that could destroy what little stability we had left. Still, my mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to. Could I really continue living like this, not knowing whether the boys I had loved and raised were biologically mine? Did it even matter? Would the court see me as nothing more than a paycheck, regardless of the truth? And most importantly, if Amanda had betrayed me once, could I ever truly trust her again? Eric's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You'll figure it out, Mark. Just remember, strength isn't about lashing out. It's about holding on until you find the right way forward." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. All I knew was that the road ahead was uncertain, and whatever choice I made next would change everything. I stormed into my office that night, emotions running high, and without hesitating, I began typing up my resignation letter. The weight of everything, the doubts, the anger, the betrayal, pressed on my chest like a heavy stone. I was furious. Furious at Amanda, at the situation, and, if I'm being honest, at myself. As the words appeared on the screen, resignation seemed symbolic, a way to walk away, not just from work, but from everything that had unraveled in my life. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, another voice crept in, my dad's voice, clear as if he were standing right beside me. He had always been a firm believer in pushing through life's challenges without succumbing to self-pity. "Self-pity is useless, Mark. It won't change anything." Those words had guided me through tough times before, and now, they anchored me once again. I didn't hand in the letter. Instead, I sat there for a long time, trying to piece together what my next step should be. The temptation to walk away, to leave everything behind, was strong, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't solve anything. Running from problems only delays them. Amanda's actions, whether past, present, or future, were beyond my control. But what I could control was my response, and, more importantly, my own happiness. By the time Amanda woke up the next morning, I was already out the door, heading to work. I didn't wait around for breakfast or even a brief conversation. I needed distance, a chance to breathe. That evening, when I got home, Amanda wasn't there, she had gone to the salon. By the time she returned, I was already fast asleep. Our lives started operating on two separate schedules, with little overlap. On her days off, I told her I had a darts league, but the truth was, I had started seeing a psychoanalyst. Those therapy sessions became a lifeline. Through them, I came to understand two key things. First, I wasn't any more flawed than the next person. I had made mistakes, sure, but that didn't mean I was broken or undeserving of happiness. And second, Amanda's behavior, whatever it had been or might be in the future, was outside of my control. No amount of guilt, confrontation, or regret could change that. Life was full of temptations and choices, and I couldn't carry the burden of Amanda's choices on my shoulders. Over time, our marriage settled into an uneasy rhythm. We went through the motions, work, household responsibilities, raising the boys, but the emotional connection we once had seemed out of reach. I distracted myself with work and other commitments, quietly handling things Amanda didn't even know about. When our oldest son and Katie's eldest were both accepted into the same college, I covered the gap in tuition for both boys. My son had received a partial scholarship, but I quietly paid for the rest, as well as Katie's child's tuition. She never knew, and I didn't want her to. It was something I felt compelled to do, a way to ensure our kids had the future I had worked so hard for, even if my own personal life felt like it was crumbling. 3 years later, when the same situation happened with our younger children, I did it again, covering their expenses without a word. That brings me to today, grappling with a decision I never thought I'd have to make, whether to stay and keep things as they are, or finally leave and start over. I remember Amanda's reaction when I tried to broach the subject of separation. Her voice rose sharply, the disbelief evident in her eyes. After 20 years, you're doing this now? After everything we've been through together? She flipped through the papers I had prepared, her expression shifting from shock to anger. No alimony? What about the savings, the household debt? She demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. What's your game here? I forced myself to stay calm, keeping my tone even. We both earn about the same, Amanda. Our retirement accounts are comparable. It's fair. Technically, that wasn't entirely true. I had deliberately kept my salary raises modest over the years and minimized contributions to my 401k. But this wasn't about money, it was about finding peace, finally letting go of something that had long since stopped being what it once was. None of that matters, Amanda snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. I deserve to know the truth. Who is she? I shook my head, weary of the accusations. There's no one else, Amanda. There were mistakes, yes, but we don't need to rehash them now. Let's just move forward. Her response was immediate and brutal. She grabbed her glass of wine and hurled it at me. The liquid splashed across my face, and the glass shattered behind me on the deck. I stood there for a moment, stunned, before turning and walking toward the kitchen, trying to stay composed. She followed me, her voice rising in fury. You piece of trash. You think you can throw me out just so you can go chase some younger woman? No wonder our bed life has been awful. You've been too busy thinking about someone else. I didn't respond. I simply turned on the faucet, rinsing the wine off my face as she continued shouting behind me. Her words cut deep, but I knew reacting in anger wouldn't help. Strength, as my father had taught me, wasn't about bravado or lashing out, it was about standing firm, even when everything around you threatened to break you. As I dried my face with a towel, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window. I didn't see a man defeated, I saw someone at a crossroads, someone who still had the power to choose his path. And that realization, more than anything Amanda could say, gave me the clarity I needed. Whatever happened next, I was ready. Amanda's voice trembled as she spoke, and for a brief moment, I saw the weight of guilt she had been carrying. I felt like I was losing myself, she admitted. Like I wasn't Amanda anymore, just someone's wife or mom. I needed something to remind me that I was still me. I leaned back in my chair, unimpressed. Amanda, I was working 2 jobs and going to college for our family. You think I don't know what hard feels like? I don't need to hear how difficult it was for you. She ignored my frustration and pressed on, as if she needed to get it all out before she lost the nerve. Josh was just fun, she continued quietly. His mom would come over sometimes to help with the baby, and I could actually breathe for a little while. He always had a drink in his hand, and after a while, I started joining him. It felt different. He made me feel alive again in a way I hadn't felt in so long. We'd mess around with his camera, pretend we were doing real photo shoots, and I just let myself get carried away. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had thought those photographs were the worst of it, the ultimate betrayal. But this confession was something else entirely. I could barely process what I was hearing. My mind raced as I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Are you telling me," I stammered, "that you slept with that drunk while my son was just a few feet away?" Amanda's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, her sobs coming in ragged gasps. "Oh God, Mark. I'm so ashamed. I don't know what I was thinking. Breathe," I cut in sharply, shoving a paper bag into her hands. "Slow, steady breaths through your nose." After a moment, her breathing stabilized. She placed the bag on the table, her face pale but composed. I didn't take my eyes off her. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, my tone calm but accusing. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. She shook her head vehemently, twisting the paper bag in her hands. I suspected, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't know for sure. I hoped, I prayed. I didn't let her finish. "Come on, Amanda. You graduated with honors in biology. You must have thought I was an idiot for believing your story about a positive blood type." Her lip quivered, but she didn't respond. There was nothing left for her to say. The silence between us grew thick, heavy with years of lies and half-truths. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady but tired. "I trusted you to make the right choices. Now it's my turn to make one." Tears welled in her eyes again, and she broke down. "Please, Mark. Don't do this." I shook my head slowly. "No, Amanda. The lies end here. The boys deserve the truth. Secrets like this, they destroy trust. Either you tell them, or I will." Her voice cracked, and she clutched at the edge of the table, desperate. "What do you expect me to say? Hey boys, your mom is a lying, unfaithful mess who betrayed your father. Is that what you want?" I managed a small, weary smile, one that barely masked the pain I felt inside. "You can leave out the colorful adjectives. Just tell them you made a mistake, that we both love them, and that no matter what, we'll still be their parents." Amanda didn't respond right away. She just sat there, shoulders slumped, broken in a way I had never seen before. As much as her betrayal hurt, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the woman sitting across from me, the woman I had loved for so long, who now seemed like a stranger. Several months ago, I might have imagined a different outcome. I might have believed we could get through this, that time and effort could mend what had been broken. But now, I wasn't sure there was anything left to salvage. Even if forgiveness was possible, trust felt like a distant dream. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, I found myself thinking about something my father had once told me. "Life isn't fair, Mark, but fairness isn't what makes you a man. Strength does. And real strength? It's knowing when to fight and when to walk away." His words had stayed with me through every challenge I had faced, and now, they echoed louder than ever. In the weeks that followed, I grappled with the fallout of Amanda's confession. I went to work, took care of the boys, and kept up appearances. But inside, I was a mess. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever, something had to give. Eventually, I made my decision. I packed a bag and moved into a small, mediocre apartment across town while I figured out my next steps. Naturally, I joined a gym, one of those things newly single, middle-aged men do to feel like they're regaining control. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small step toward rebuilding a life that had come crashing down. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep living in the shadow of betrayal. Whether Amanda and I could find a way to co-parent peacefully or not, I was determined to carve out a new path, for myself and for my boys. Whatever came next, I would face it with strength, because, as my father had taught me, that's what being a man truly means. I've never been one for working out, but after everything that had happened, I figured joining a gym might help clear my head. One evening, while waiting for a free personal training session, I heard a voice that instantly pulled me out of my thoughts. "Mark? Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you." I turned around, surprised to see Katie, our old neighbor. She looked amazing, toned and confident in a snug leotard with the gym's logo on it. Before I could say a word, she wrapped me in a warm hug. It was the first genuine, friendly embrace I'd had in a long time, and it caught me off guard. As we caught up, Katie's energy was infectious. She was always cheerful, always ready with a quick laugh. After our workout, we found ourselves at a nearby coffee shop, where she playfully teased me about my indecision over what to order. "Mark, just tell the barista what you like. They can make it for you." I sighed, feeling a little out of my element. "Fine, just give me something manly enough to drink at a football game without getting mocked." Katie chuckled, patting my shoulder as we found a table. "I've missed you," she said with a genuine smile. "Ha! You probably just missed having someone fix things around your house for free," I teased. She grinned mischievously. "Maybe a little, but seriously, I'm glad we ran into each other." The conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was relaxed. No tension, no overthinking, just two old friends catching up. Before I knew it, time had slipped away, and Katie suddenly glanced at her watch. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Oh no, Mark. I've got to run, the last bus is about to leave." "Forget the bus," I said, waving her off. "I'll give you a ride home." Her relief was palpable, though she hesitated for a moment. "Thanks, Mark. My car's been out of commission, starter issues, I think. It finally gave up the ghost, and I haven't had the time to get it fixed." We drove to her place, and after a bit of conversation, I suggested we swing by the auto parts store to check if they had the right starter in stock. Luckily, they did, and it was even on sale. Amanda wasn't home, so I still had access to the garage and my tools. With everything I needed on hand, it didn't take more than an hour to get Katie's car running again. When the engine roared to life, Katie's face lit up with pure joy. Without warning, she threw her arms around me in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mark. Seriously, you have no idea how much this means to me." From that point on, I started spending some of my evenings at Katie's place, helping her with small projects around the house, fixing squeaky doors, patching up paint, replacing worn-out fixtures. Nothing major, but it gave me something to focus on, something to do with my hands besides wringing them in frustration over everything happening in my life. One night, after finishing up a few repairs, we settled down with a bottle of wine. The atmosphere was warm and peaceful, the kind of comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. As we sat there, Katie opened up about her late husband. "He was one of the good ones," she said softly, her voice tinged with both love and sorrow. "Always helping people, even when it wasn't his job. He died because of a drunk driver. He stopped to help a woman with a flat tire, and some guy didn't even slow down." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in a painful memory. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, letting her speak, offering quiet support. "That night, I thought my whole world had ended," she continued. "But I had to keep going, for my son, for myself. You do what you have to, right?" Her words stayed with me long after I left that night. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it, and sometimes all you can do is keep moving forward. I returned to my small, lonely apartment, feeling both grateful for the connection I still had with Katie and weighed down by the choices I knew I needed to make. These evenings with her had become a rare bright spot in the middle of the chaos that was my life. But they also made me confront a difficult question: was I holding on to something with Amanda that was already beyond repair? Or was it time to finally let go and start building something new, something real? I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find the strength to figure it all out. "I put you to bed, you were completely wiped out," I replied, unscrewing the drain trap beneath the sink. With a grin, I slid my hand out to reveal the trap, now clogged with a thick mess of tangled hair. "Katie, seriously, do you wash a mongoose in this sink?" Before she could answer, the front door slammed, and hurried footsteps echoed through the house. Then came a voice I knew all too well, sharp and accusatory. "Where is he? What are you doing with my husband?" I groaned, mentally bracing myself. Amanda stormed in, eyes blazing as she scanned the room, ready for a confrontation. Before I could get a word in, Katie stepped in between us, calm and unfazed. "Amanda," she said, her voice steady but firm, "there's nothing going on between us." Amanda looked ready to argue, but Katie raised her hand dramatically, cutting her off. "That's right, there's nothing between us, yet. But that's about to change. Starting now, I'm taking your ex-husband upstairs." Amanda and I stood frozen, mouths agape, unsure whether to laugh or protest. Without missing a beat, Katie took Amanda gently by the hand and led her toward the front door. "Please, Amanda," Katie said calmly, "even though we've known each other for years, call first next time. We'll be busy." With that, she closed the door in Amanda's stunned face and returned to the kitchen, finding me still wide-eyed. Katie leaned against the counter, raising an eyebrow. "You okay?" she asked with a smirk. "I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "That was bold." She chuckled and shrugged. It needed to be done. Later that evening, as we sat on the couch with a bottle of wine between us, Katie brought up something I hadn't expected. "You know," she said, propping herself up on one arm, "why don't you just move in here permanently? It's practical. You need a place to live, I've got the room, and we've been friends for decades. Besides," she added playfully, "you care about me, I care about you, and you know this house better than anyone." I hesitated, glancing out the window toward my old house across the street. "What about Amanda? It might get awkward." Katie shrugged, unconcerned. "That's her problem, not ours. She doesn't have a say in who sets foot in my house. Besides, if things ever get tense, we'll miss you," she said simply. Her confidence was reassuring, but I still couldn't shake my concern about how this would affect the boys. Surprisingly, they adapted to our new dynamic without any trouble. By the time Christmas rolled around, they had even convinced Amanda to join us at Katie's for a brief visit. It wasn't perfect, there was still an undeniable tension in the air, but it was progress. Over time, Amanda and Katie grew polite, if not exactly friendly. Katie even encouraged me to keep helping Amanda with small repairs around the house and spending time with the boys there. Despite everything that had happened, we found a rhythm that worked for everyone. After a year of living with Katie, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: I was genuinely happy. Our love wasn't fiery or dramatic, it was steady, comforting, and built on years of trust and friendship. The boys thrived in the stability we created. Watching them grow into strong, kind young men filled me with pride. Holidays became a delicate balancing act, sometimes at Katie's, sometimes at Amanda's, but they were always filled with laughter and a mutual respect, even if the past lingered at the edges. My father's words often came back to me during those moments: a man's strength lies in letting go of what he cannot change and holding firm to what truly matters. Sitting with Katie, watching our boys joke and laugh together, I finally understood what he meant. Life hadn't gone the way I'd planned, but in the end, I had found something better: peace, family, and a love that, while different from what I had once dreamed of, was real and enduring. As I sat on the porch one evening, listening to the distant laughter of the boys playing in the yard, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: contentment. The road had been long, painful, and uncertain, but somehow, we had all made it through. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I knew I had finally found what I'd been searching for: a life worth holding on to.